understandably, people get tired of hearing about war. There's too much going on in the world, it seems sometimes. And of course, the vast majority of human history has been warfare, right? It is only perhaps just a couple hundred years, maybe 230 to 292, depending on what study you read, calendar years, where there has been peace globally in thousands of years of recorded history. Only about, let's just say, 300 years of peace. Now, there have been pockets of peace, of course, in times such as the Pax Romana, when Rome came in and it conquered and it was able to establish peace in the world. It guarded against local conflicts, and that was such a blessing because that helped the gospel to go out. After 1945, there's been something of a Pax Americana, where we are seeing a global peace without global conflict. Although, of course, certain areas continue to have wars. There's been Vietnam, there's been Korea, there's been other conflicts, Iran, Iraq, all the rest of that. But globally, of course, there has been a bit of peace, and folks have been able to live at peace. Well, that's what Daniel is hoping for his people. He's hoping that there is a coming peace for them. And that's what we've been looking at, really starting with chapter 10. And he's been praying about this. Unfortunately, in chapter 10, verse 1, we see that he receives a revelation, and that revelation is one of great conflict. And so his people is not going to have the peace that he hopes as he's getting to the end of his life. They are actually going to have war. And that war is going to last through what is known as the intertestamental period, the period between the testaments, between the Old and New Testaments. Now, Daniel will be upset about this, but he can be comforted by the fact that the Lord is predicting all this. Because if the Lord is predicting all this, that means the Lord is going to have control of all of this. He's going to make sure that it is moving according to his will. God can use these conflicts of sinful people, sinlessly on his part, to accomplish his purposes, even if God's people don't enjoy the temporary circumstances. And that is true of all of time. We go through things, we don't enjoy those things in the moment, but we know that it is according to the will of God, and that God has a reason for it, even if we don't know that reason. Well, that's what we're looking at this evening. God can use conflicts of sinful people sinlessly, as I said, for his purposes. And we'll see that really with 3 points this evening. We'll note that the Lord allows the king of the south to remain dominant over Israel. He allows the king of the south to remain dominant over Israel. We will note that he allows the king of the north to gain dominance over Israel. He will allow the king of the north to gain dominance over Israel. And then finally, he allows the king of the north to oppress Israel. And we will see that as we move forward. But let's begin by looking at this uncomfortable prophecy with the dominance of the kingdom of the south, the kingdom of the south. And so we read again in verses 10 through 12, his sons will mobilize and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one of them will keep on coming and overflow and pass through, that he may gain, or that he may again wage war up to his very fortress. The king of the south will be enraged and go forth and fight with the king of the north. Then the latter will raise a great multitude, but that multitude will be given into the hand of the former. When the multitude is carried away, his heart will be lifted up, and he will cause tens of thousands to fall. Yet He will not prevail. He will not prevail. Now, what are we talking about here? Because obviously, this is a lot of detailed history. It can get a little confusing, a little dicey. We need to remember, again, going backward, we need to remember that we are dealing mainly in this section with the histories of the North and South. This would be the Seleucid Empire to the north, the Seleucid Empire to the north. Uh, of course, this is Israel, so north would be this way. And then to the south, we have the Ptolemaic Empire or kingdom right there. So the Seleucids to the north and the Ptolemies to the south. And so that's who we are dealing with. And what we have is a peace agreement in the previous verses. You might remember that the king of the south sent the king of the north his daughter for marriage. And that didn't work out very well. It was very much like a soap opera. He had to marry her, even though he was already married. He put away his wife. She wasn't too happy about that. Then the king of the south died, and so he tried to get back with his wife, but his wife was still a little upset with him for going and marrying this other woman. And so she kills him. And then she also kills the daughter of the king of the south. Well, what happens? Well, her brother decides to go to war, and he does. And he causes destruction. He displays great strength. Verse 7. Verse 8, he carries away their metal images. He humiliates them. And he brings these things back from the north to the south, and there he stays for a little while because he has to focus then on some domestic issues that are going on in the south. And so this was a humiliation. And if you look at the sizes of these respective kingdoms, well, the Seleucid kingdom obviously is much, much larger, and so they probably felt very ashamed by the fact that they were just defeated in battle. And they were probably pretty sore about that. And verse 9 says that they launch a counterattack, but it's unsuccessful and they have to go back home. So there's a little salt in the wound. And that's where we are at this point. And you can see that obviously relations between these kingdoms have broken down. There are wars going on between them. We were talking about Seleucus' sons who are keeping up the fight. In fact, they're saying, okay, we are going to now push forward. We are going to have success. And they push out in Asia Minor, and they push out back down to the south. One of these sons becomes very noteworthy, and the son pushing to the south is Antiochus the Third. Antiochus the Third. We talked briefly last time about Antiochus II. This is Antiochus III. He is one of Seleucus' sons, and he is remembered in history as Antiochus the Great. Antiochus the Great. So you had Alexander the Great, now you have Antiochus the Great. And it's because he has a lot of victories to his name. Unfortunately, his brother was murdered, and so he is the one who carries on the rule of the Seleucid Empire. And so he starts pushing against Egypt. Egypt controlled the territory north to the borders of Syria, and that includes Israel. And remember, ultimately, all of this history concerns Israel, right in the middle. Caught in the middle is little Israel and Jerusalem, all of God's people. And they are facing a very powerful enemy, both to the north and to the south. And they are being kicked each time one fights the other, passing through their land. Because guess what? If there's a battle, it is going right through the middle. The King's Highway, it passes right through Jerusalem. It is right in the middle. Now, God had designed that for a reason, because that also gave each time with these soldiers as they are passing through, that gave them exposure to the true God. And they had a chance to learn about the true God and to worship him. That's why this was such a popular road, and this is why God chose this area for his people. But that also means that each time there was warfare, it passed through their land, and that was obviously unpleasant for them. Well, we read in verse 10 here that his son, that would be Antiochus the third, he comes and he keeps on coming, and he will overflow and he will pass through. This is very picturesque language because he is gathering up force and strength, and he is going to push back against the king of the south. And we see that he wages war up to his very fortress. He expanded the Seleucid kingdom with battles with the Ptolemies. And so he is pushing back. In 221 BC, he captured part of Palestine. So part of what is and should be Israel. He captured part of it. And that's a little bit of foreshadowing because eventually he will take control, but not quite yet. Not quite yet. He captures part of it. He is going to lose most of those gains, though, in battle a little bit later. I'm trying not to get too much into the details, but I also want to give you enough detail to make sense of this. And he is going to eventually win Palestine. But just not quite yet. We'll talk about that in a moment. This isn't an easy road because verse 11 says that the king of the south will be enraged. He is not happy that the king of the north is coming against him so hard and so furiously. And Egypt wants to remain dominant, and so he is going to push back. And so the king of the south, which is Ptolemy the fourth, he's Ptolemy the fourth, he becomes enraged and he will fight the king of the north. He raises up a great multitude. Ptolemy, that is, raises up a great multitude, but it is given into the hand of the former. And when the multitude is carried away, Ptolemy's heart will be lifted up, because he causes tens of thousands to fall, even though he does not prevail in the long term. And so he is going to be able to raise up an army. He's going to be very proud of that because he's going to retake the parts of Jerusalem, the parts of Israel, the parts of Palestine that he lost. He's going to push this great Seleucid empire backward, and he is going to be pretty proud. And he is a proud man. This guy is perhaps not the kind of guy that you would want to know. As I was reading a little bit about him, I don't know, he might be a little bit like our governor. He is a little bit of a fancy guy. Let's just put it that way, I guess. He also is very debauched. He murdered members of his family, and he gave himself over to all kinds of sin, all kinds of sin. And so this is the height of the Ptolemaic Empire, and I guess as it's the height, the kings are doing things that people shouldn't be doing. He's a playboy. And he did somehow, even with his mind on sinful things, he did manage to push back against Antiochus the Great, Antiochus the Third, and to win. But what I was saying about him losing those troops, Antiochus, he raised up that army, but Antiochus ended up losing 17,000 troops. The Egyptians, they only lost 2,200. That is considered a victory. When you have more chess pieces on the board than the other guy, you have won. And so they did well. Ptolemy's pride then led him to do some things. He went up to Jerusalem and he desecrated the temple. He desecrated the temple. He was proud of himself. Egypt's internal unrest, however, would follow. And Upper Egypt would eventually secede from the Ptolemaic Empire. So there's all kinds of civil unrest that is happening at home. So this is all part of God's sovereign hand. He is allowing that to happen. And this is happening while the king of the south is dominant. Well, guess what? God is now turning the tables. And he is ensuring that the king of the south is being weakened. These kings rage and they plot, but guess what? The Lord directs history. The Lord directs history. And the south remains dominant for a season. But it sets the stage for what follows. And so believers in Daniel say, as well as ours, can take comfort in the fact that no ruler or no empire operates outside of God's decree. All of this is happening according to God's plan. And he is going to make sure that all of these things ultimately work out for his glory and for the good of his people. Ptolemy desecrates the temple. Well, guess what? The Ptolemies are not going to retain control of the land of Israel, the beautiful land. And that brings us to the change that is happening in our second point. The Lord allows the king of the north to gain dominance over Israel. Look at verses 13 through 15. For the king of the north will again raise a greater multitude than the former, and after an interval of some years, he will press on with a great army and much equipment. Now, in those times, many will rise up against the king of the south. The violent ones among your people will also lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they will fall down. Then the king of the north will come, cast up a siege ramp, and capture a well-fortified city, and the forces of the south will not stand their ground, not even their choicest troops, for there will be no strength to make a stand. So at this point, there is a significant development, because what we see at this point is that the Ptolemies, the king of the south, they are no longer going to be dominant. Now the king of the north will begin to have supremacy. This is the Seleucid supremacy. And so as we get into what is the next Syrian war here, approximately 15 years later, Antiochus III again invades with a huge army. He builds up himself a nice large army, and he is going to go against the south. Now, Ptolemy IV, in the meantime, has died mysteriously. He has died mysteriously. And he is succeeded by Ptolemy V, who is only a child. He is only about 4 to 6 years old. Now, even though that sounds really cool to be a kid and think, oh, I could be a king at that age, unfortunately, your enemies think it's pretty cool too. And they decide that that's an opportune time to come against you. And that is exactly what Antiochus III thought. He thought this is an excellent opportunity to exploit. And he allied himself with Philip V of Macedon. So one of the Greek kings there, he is aligning himself, and they together will attack the south. Now, in those times, as we see, many will rise up, but this includes some of God's people. Because as we've been going through this, can you imagine living this? Can you imagine living, say, somewhere in the middle of where we are in the text, and seeing all of Daniel's prophecies coming true one by one? Hey, it happened just like the king of the north, king against king of the south, king of the south, king against king of the north. This is all happening as God predicted. How might you react if you lived in that time? You might say, now, wait a minute. It says that the king of the south is going to lose. And so once you see the king of the north coming against the king of the south, maybe you think, let's join him. Let's join him. Let's help fulfill the prophecy. Let's help fulfill the prophecy. And isn't that what we read? Violent ones among your people will also lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision. And so they think they are going to help overthrow the South's dominance on the land, on the promised land, and they fail. They fall. Because this is not how God wills it. God does not will that we engage in warfare to try to fulfill some kind of vision. That is not how God would have us to operate, at least not in that sense right there. And what we see is that these are not necessarily individuals who are motivated by godliness. They are people who are just simply violent. And they read this, maybe they hear it from their teachers, maybe they think, okay, this is what's happening. Come on, boys, let's grab some swords and let's go. Let's fight. This is not necessarily motivated by a desire to honor God. It is just motivated by a desire to have freedom from their oppression. And that's not quite how God is pleased to allow things to operate. And so they may be aiding the Seleucids, but unfortunately, there is a loss, and there is going to be some punishment that is meted out in Jerusalem because their revolt failed as they try to gain independence based on their reading of the prophecy. It's only then that the king of the north comes. So they know that the king of the north have been raising up an army, but it's only after their failure that he comes. And so they misinterpreted the entire thing. He comes after that, and he sets up a siege ramp against a well-fortified city, as this says here, and that's Sidon in 198 BC. And the forces of the south, even their choicest troops, they cannot stand. They cannot stand. And so Antiochus III, he pursues Scopas. He is the one who actually put some of these Jews to death for rising up and for rebelling. He pursues Scopas to Sidon after the Battle of Panium, which is near Caesarea Philippi, and he captured it, and he comes against him. And what do we read here in the text? He does as he pleases. So it's at this point that the king of the north is allowed complete freedom. Just like Nebuchadnezzar, just like others, he is given complete freedom, and he will be able to have victory over this general from the south. He takes the land. He takes the city. He stays in the beautiful land, we read here, with destruction in his land, with destruction in his hand, excuse me. And he's well received. He's well received. The people are happy to see him. Why? Because they are ready. They are ready for the Ptolemies to be gone. Obviously, some of them had risen up in rebellion. They are ready for the Ptolemies to be gone. And so Antiochus III comes, and they are happy to see him. They are rejoicing, and he is well received. He's granting rights. They're granting rights to worship and exemptions. And you would think, okay, all is well in Israel. There's a little bit of irony here in the text, especially if you've read further on, because the Seleucid ownership of the beautiful land, now that the king of the north owns the land instead of the king of the south, this is going to set up an opportunity for future oppression. not from Antiochus III, but from his son, Antiochus IV, who we've talked about in the past. Antiochus IV is going to come, and we are going to read about him starting in verse 21. In his place, a despicable person will arise, and that is his son. That is Antiochus IV. So the Jews are celebrating right now because Antiochus III has liberated them from the king of the south, and the king of the south wasn't a good guy, but it also sets up his son to come in and oppress the land. And he will bring terrors in his hand, and we will talk about that a little bit later. And God's sovereignty allows all of this. So he allows this dominance. He allows even these pagan kings to fulfill his word. And the Jews' failed revolt reminds us that we can't force prophecy. You know, this reminds me of those who are trying to force some end times scenario. You can't force things along on your timetable. You have to let God do things on his timetable. You can't just say, okay, well, let's see if we can't kick off Revelation here. No, that's not the way that we do things. That's not the way God calls us to do things. And this was a mistake on their part. True fulfillment comes by his hand alone, and we need to trust God with control. Now, change is in the air. Change is in the air, but it brings new challenges. And so the Lord's people must trust his sovereignty amid these shifting powers, and that's what we'll talk about here in our remaining verses 17 through 20, as we see that the Lord allows the king of the north to oppress Israel. Because we're setting that stage. He will set his face to come with the power of his whole kingdom, bringing with him a proposal of peace, which he will put into effect. But he will give him the daughter of women to ruin it. But she will not take a stand for him or be on his side. Then he will turn his face to the coastlands and capture many. But a commander will put a stop to his scorn against him. Moreover, he will repay him for his scorn. So he will turn his face toward the fortresses of his own land, but he will stumble and fall and be found no more. Then in his place one will arise who will send an oppressor through the jewel of his kingdom. Yet within a few days he will be shattered, though not in anger nor in battle. So, Antiochus is on top at the moment. He is at top in the moment, and he thinks, okay, I've got a great idea. I'm going to send my daughter down to the king of the south to marry him. Now, if you're feeling like you have some deja vu, yes, this is very much like what we read about earlier in the chapter. It's funny, there's nothing new under the sun. People do tend to come up with the same ideas that other people had. And this idea involves his daughter named Cleopatra. Cleopatra, you say, oh, I know Cleopatra. That's that whole thing with Mark Antony and the Romans, and unfortunately you're wrong. That's the wrong Cleopatra. This is Cleopatra the first. This is the first Cleopatra. This is in 195 BC or thereabouts. The one you're thinking of is a little bit later in history, a lot closer to the birth of Christ. But here we see the same plan unfold. I am going to send my daughter to marry this young king. And because she's my daughter, she will rule the kingdom, or at least influence the kingdom, on my behalf. Because he's young. And this will be a great opportunity for me to undermine Egypt. And that is the hope. That is the hope. But the scheme fails. The scheme fails. She actually um, sides with the king of the south. She does not remain loyal to her father. I don't know if she just feels like this is just a bad situation or what, but she sides with her new husband. She feels for him, and she decides, I'm actually going to help him to have success against my father. And so this scheme goes about as well as the last one. Um, she actually interferes with her father's own plans, and we see that instead of this proposal of peace for her to ruin the kingdom, she will not take a stand for him or be on his side, that is Antiochus III's side. So Antiochus III is thinking, all right, let's focus on the coastlands. And this is where his brother had went. His brother didn't last for very long, but he now goes up to Asia Minor, to Greece, and he captures many up there. There's a lot of battles here, and we see that he is eventually stopped. He is stopped, the text says. And he is stopped by the Romans. Now, the Romans are here, and the Romans are already a growing force in the region. They are not quite the powerhouse yet that they will be come the time of Christ, but they are getting there. They are getting there. And a Roman commander by the name of Lucius Cornelius Scipio stops the scorn of Antiochus III. He says, all right, this far and no farther. And he halts him. And the Romans defeated him, defeated Antiochus III at Thermopylae. Thermopylae's had lots of battles. And then Magnesia. And then at the Treaty of Apamea, he humiliates Antiochus. And Antiochus is forced to cede territory, to surrender his forces, including ships, his navy. He has to pay reparations to Rome for the fighting. And he has to send hostages, including his own son. His own son, who will later be Antiochus IV. He actually has to go to Rome as a prisoner first. He will return later to take over where his father failed. Antiochus III is humiliated. And he returns home instead of with victory, with bills. Because he has to pay reparations to Rome. And Rome wanted a lot. They wanted a lot of money. A lot more money than the Seleucid Empire could easily pay. And so, Antiochus III, he has this idea, I've got to get money somewhere. Verse 19, he turns his face toward the fortresses of his own land. He begins plundering the temple of Bel to pay tribute. The people there are not too happy with that idea. And so as he's trying to plunder the temple, they rise up, they revolt, and they kill him. And that is it. He stumbles and he falls, and he is no more. Antiochus III, Antiochus the Great, is killed while trying to steal money from one of his own fortresses. That's the end of him. What an end that is. A lot of people don't end well. Well, of course, the Seleucid Empire has to go on. And so in his place arises Seleucus the Fourth. Seleucus the Fourth. And he sends out an oppressor because guess what? Those bills did not die with Antiochus. Boy, these bill collectors, they know how to keep coming after you, don't they? And that is exactly what happens. The Romans say, okay, you still owe us reparations for this war. And they tell the new king, Seleucus, hey, you have to get us the money somehow. And so he starts sending out an oppressor, as the text says here. And he sends his oppressor out to collect this money. This oppressor is known as Heliodorus in history. And he goes through the jewel of the kingdom, which is the Temple of Jerusalem, to collect Roman tribute. And so now the temple in Jerusalem is threatened because of the war reparations. This battle that was happening in Asia Minor and to the north, and that ended with a Roman victory, now somehow affects Israel because they said, hey, there's gold in the temple of Jerusalem. We can get some money there. Well, in the Apocrypha, in 2 Maccabees 3, it is recorded there that Heliodorus attempted to enter the temple. And the priest said, no, don't do it. And he made it as far as the doorway, and he was stopped. And he encountered a vision there of angels, of horses, of various things. And he is just overwhelmed with that. And he collapses at the door of the temple. And they carry him out, and he recovers. He then goes back home empty-handed. And it's at that point that he decides, I'm going to poison Seleucus IV. And he does. And that's the end of Seleucus IV. He kills him. Oh, these verses highlight this intrigue, all these shifting alliances, but this is all within God's control. Now, as God's people, it is so easy to give in to the temptation to despair. When there is so much going on in the world, we may think, okay, how can God fix this? How can God fix this? God can fix it. The how really isn't the question. The when is the question. When is the question? Because as we see that God is predicting all of these things and they are all being fulfilled perfectly, well then, we know that we can trust God with history. And he will fulfill things, whether they be through angels, whether they be through human agents. He will fulfill things. He will even take pagans and make sure that his word is fulfilled. As one commentator notes, he sets up one and pulls down another as he pleases. He will make sure that this comes to pass, whatever it is that his will determines. As we think about that, of course, we're going to hear about wars and rumors of wars. And these things will continue until Christ comes. But we can take heart. We can take heart because our God reigns. Our God reigns. He has numbered the days of these ancient kings, and he has numbered ours as well. We can trust in him throughout the conflicts of our lives, and we can trust him with our future. God is in control. And praise God, he is.